But the thing that always stands out is they always say your staff are amazing. And generally, even in the best experiences in the best restaurants in the world, for the layman, not for the food nerd who's categorises everything. I mean, I just about remember every dish I ever ate in every restaurant ever. But most people will forget the food.
For sure.
They won't forget how they were treated.
Yep. That was this week's guest, Chef Dan Hunter, and this is Conscious Conversations. Welcome. If you're new, welcome. If you're not new and this year you're a repeat listener, welcome back. But my name's Luke McLean, and I'm a life coach and I'm a meditation teacher, and I'm really curious about people who are living a conscious and authentic life, but more importantly, people that have carved out a really successful career in doing that. And this conversation with Dan Hunter, who is a world-class chef in his own right, but also created a restaurant called Brae, which is a world-class restaurant. And when you consider that there's around about 5 million restaurants in the world, and Dan and his wife Jules have been able to create something that sits in the top 50, often the top 30 restaurants in the world, often the top 5 to 3 restaurants in Australia. It's a pretty phenomenal effort, and that's what we get into in this conversation with Dan is the process, the clarity of vision, and what's needed to develop something that's truly world class. So if you're a foodie, this is a great conversation because, we do talk a little bit about that. But if you're into leadership, if you're looking to start something yourself, this is also, I think, a really timely conversation because we sort of get into not just being about the food, but it's just about so much more. And often when we talk about creating something, it's not just the outcome of what people see, it's what happens behind the scenes, and it's every little thing that needs to go together for the outcome to happen. And that's what we get into in this conversation. So I really hope you like it. If you want to get more of Dan, I think he's on Instagram at Chef Dan Hunter, or you just hit up Brae on Instagram or the Brae website. If you want to check out a bit more of me, it's lukemclean.net, Conscious Conversations in iTunes or Spotify, or Luke McLean Mindfulness on Instagram. But, this is a really timely conversation. It's a thoughtful conversation. There's plenty of slow pauses because Dan is very thoughtful. He just doesn't answer on a whim. He, took the questions in and he answered them as they came. So without further ado, this is Conscious Conversations, and this is Chef Dan Hunter. Dan, thanks for coming on, mate. Really wanted to sort of discuss and get into this conversation, around how you've built, a world-class restaurant, but not so much the outcome of the restaurant, but what were the steps and obviously the process to get to that point, and for you personally, but then how you sort of go from being like a really good chef to a great chef, then to actually owning a restaurant and all the other parts that come to that delivery of the outcome that actually gets to the plate, because it's not just that.
No, it's not just cooking.
The experience. So for you, when did you start to really get an interest in food and an interest in that sort of the creativity and the experience of food?
I guess in a funny sense, compared to maybe some of my peers, I probably came to cooking a little bit later than some do. I think it's more common now that people sort of see school out and then, have a bit of a play around and then decide their profession post that period, I guess. But, traditionally cooking's been one of those things, you weren't good at anything else, so you fell into cooking. That sort of thing. And I think the industry's changed dramatically in the last, or certainly during my career, that it's now, there's a lot of smart people cooking. It's not just something that you do when you can't do something that's more academic. And I think cooking's become quite academic, But anyway, I mean, I sort of left school and didn't really have an objective rather than to hang out with my mates and have some fun. And sort of early 20s, found myself in a kitchen one day doing some cash work, washing dishes. Wasn't the greatest day I've had in the kitchen, that one, that's for sure. Broke a window. Just about got kicked out from the owner, but essentially found myself within a kitchen in my early 20s, doing dishwashing and some very basic sort of food prep after that, and just really liked it, just really enjoyed the fact that people could be themselves. It wasn't a place where you had to be a certain academic level or you had to have your hair cut a certain way, or
Yep.
it's you could be yourself. You're sort of locked away a bit in those days, so it's pretty rough back in the kitchen at times. Camaraderie was a big thing. I was sort of, I guess, into a lot of sport when I was, a teenager, and team sports particularly, and I sort of saw some comparison in the behaviour of what was going on in the workplace, in I guess back of house, and the team, necessity to get the job done, and I really enjoyed those sort of aspects, and eventually travelling with Jules, my wife. Spent some time in the UK, overseas, and again was working in kitchens the whole time. Sort of got myself into a cooking job through just sort of basically lying at a job interview and stealing some books from a library to get myself through, and sort of got a fairly, it was a pretty terrible place. It was a pub, but my role was sort of higher up in the chain. And sort of got myself through about 5 or 6 months of just doing that. And realised that it was something that I was good at, and also something that interested me, And upon returning to Australia at about 23, had planned to do things properly. Do it professionally, do an apprenticeship, do an adult apprenticeship, and sort of started the real progression really into what I do today from sort of that moment. And I guess entering something as an adult, you have the ability to sort of focus a bit more. You do it a bit more seriously. Certainly, having a wage of $200 a week as a mature age
for sure
apprentice is pretty shit. So you make sure you're getting the most out of it. So basically the last 22 or so years have been in it.
That they sometimes they talk about experiences or people can really shape your future. In terms of what was that? Was it either, or was it something different that went from, okay, I want to do this well, as though I just want to do it and get a job, and then the transition to actually I want to sort of become one of the best there is at how this actually looks?
I've always really loved restaurants. The minute I sort of got into cooking was because I was sort of getting into eating. And I think all the best cooks will probably agree they prefer to be sitting in the dining room than in the kitchen. And I think that love of being at a table with people, being in the buzz of a really busy place or an excellent place, doesn't have to be busy, but it has to be excellent. I've always really enjoyed that, and really the minute I made the decision to go from working in a pretty average pub, washing dishes and cooking chicken curries for with English recipes based behind it, to going, I want to work in a proper restaurant and do things properly and learn how to butcher an animal, learn how to break down fish, learn the skills involved, learn how to make things taste nice. Sort of haven't really wavered from that moment. It was a very, very much a wholehearted decision back then to go pull a button on it and go, let's do this thing properly to the best of ability and see where it goes. And not knowing where that goes, having absolutely zero comprehension of what that means, but always wanting to do things properly, things that were within my control, to do it at the highest possible level.
Has that always been in your sort of values and purpose, even as a kid with sport and those sorts of things? Was it to try to really get the best out of yourself in whatever you did?
Yeah, certainly wasn't at school. but I think, look, to be honest, I think in friendships, I think in...
What you got interest in
relationships, and I think in... I played a lot of tennis to a fairly high standard when I was a kid, and I guess, when you're out in a court one-on-one, there's no one to rely on. And so I guess, I used to play before school and play after school and do that properly for about 5 or 6 years. But also chucked it in at about 16, 17, just so this is what's the point of this competition? And I guess that one-on-one competition that exists in sport to outdo another sort of started to rub me the wrong way. Whereas in a kitchen, you're not outdoing another.
No, it's a team.
And it's not competition against you, against other restaurants. It's really just against yourselves and providing experience to your guests that they can't have anywhere else in the world. To be well and truly, for them to understand that there's at that moment, there's nowhere else they could have that moment, so.
And is that moment and that that want for that experience for that person? Is that sort of the measure of success? Because I guess when you're in sport, there's a winner and a loser. It's quite definitive of the outcome. But as you said, with the restaurant, you're not measuring yourself against something, but there has to be a measure of today was a good day and we did really well.
Yeah, and I guess it's about that thing is always, I guess, tied to your own standards, and reevaluating them daily, and pushing them out daily as well. Like, I mean, it's a bit of a funny thing, but some of our worst days is when the most guests come in and say thanks and they can't believe it and they're all over us. And I'm always like, I almost don't want to listen to it because I'm thinking, but we had another objective today.
Yeah, for sure.
And it was the one that we set, and I don't think we got that. And it's certainly not disheartening because it's obviously great to be gratified. And you should always be there to make your guests happy, not just yourself. But you certainly need to set your own standards and then benchmark against yourself sometimes. And obviously eat out around the world and benchmark against those places as well. And I guess that's not necessarily competition. That's just benchmarking, So it's a funny thing. I mean, you have to have a fairly high standard and I guess, levels of self-discipline and objectives that probably seem ridiculous at times, and maybe they're buried right away in your own mind, but you're certainly aiming for things on days that we don't always achieve. It's certainly great when we do.
Yeah. And what, like Dan, that there's, hundreds of thousands of restaurants in the world, across everywhere. It's one of those things where it's not just in Australia, or it's not
6 million, I think there is. One of our staff Googled it once.
Well, there you go. So there's 6 million. You sort of rest in that top 50 regularly. What's the difference like between a good restaurant, like a high performing restaurant, and then the world class? Like as you said, really key objectives and really clear outcomes. Like, have you put your finger on what you guys do, or what other, even when you go and research other restaurants, that they're doing that the other 10,000 that are just behind are good, but they're just not quite doing?
The thing that's probably key to most of the really great restaurant experience that I've had, and one that we try to give to our guests, is an experience of personality, an experience that's very unique. So, of course there's 6 million restaurants in the world. 2 million of them cook, classic Italian food. The other 2 million cook classic French food. The other 2 million cook classic Thai food. So there's boxes. There's boxes of these are developed recipes, and we don't waver for those. And those are more your comfort places you go to have a steak and chips, to have something that gives you just a simple nourishment and comfort, and it's good and it's cheap often, and you're happy with that, We don't do that. We do something where it's a celebration, and not necessarily a celebration. It might not be your birthday. The celebration might just be the fact that you're in our restaurant, celebrating that, So we try and make every day, on some level, a celebration for our guests, a party, a fiesta, It's something that...
Sorry, mate.
You just drop it out.
Something dropped out. That's
all good.
Seems all good. Oh, that was that. That's okay. Yeah.
So I guess what's the difference? I don't know. It's minute detail and I guess vision for hospitality. And hospitality and cooking are two very different things, because we always talk about the fact that I guess our menu, the food that we serve is quite creative at times. Yeah. There's certainly a lot of things that people do recognise, and there's a lot of nostalgia at times in terms of flavour profiles. And they might simply be just aromas of Australian native ingredients, or the bush, or things like that, things that put people in a place or remind them of a moment or whatever. And for internationals, it's showing them something completely new,
Yeah, okay.
So there's all that stuff. There's the detail. It's just,
So when you and Jules sat down with the vision of Brae, what's that planning look like in terms of not just the venue, but again, that look and feel? Like, what was some of the key moments or discussions that took place to sort of, this is what we're going to be, and this is what we're going to be about, and this is how we get delivered? Yeah,
I mean, I think one of the key things about Brae, and again, it comes back to that personality thing. It's very much based. It's a very personal project. It's not It's not bought off the shelf.
You're not getting the masses. You're not 400 seats or anything.
No, we're 40 seats.